Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Theora Hix. We're going to Ohio, baby. Let's go. Sin and Tonic! Hi guys, how are we? We have made it to Friday. Very excited. I'm in the mood for a weekend. A boom, boom, boom. Not sure why, just got too much to do, not enough time, it's not going to be relaxing, but still, change of pace. Well, not really. Change of... no school. All the more reason to come up the shed, chat with you, forget things that are too cray-cray. Let's go. So, we are going to the 13th of June, 1929, and we are near the Ohio State University. So, two young men are out and they've gone to a shooting range. It's very popular. They are there to do some shooting practice. And I always find it sad, but they come across something and they're a bit like, what is that? And it looks like somebody is sleeping in the long grass. It hasn't been cut, it's a bit overgrown, and it looks like someone is laying down having a nap. However, on closer inspection, what they actually find is horrifying. It is the dead body of a young woman. Her head has been incredibly beaten. It must be such a horrible sight, and her throat has also been slit. They run off, terrified, and they go and get help. They go and get the police. When the policemen arrive, because like I said, the grass was tall and it was a bit damp and stuff like that, so this clever policeman, he could see that the tracks from these boys that have gone over to her body and then the tracks of them leaving and running away. But there were no other tracks. So this policeman determined that her body must have been there for quite a while, or long enough for the grass to have gone back to its original position. During the autopsy, it was found that it was most likely a hammer that had caused 17 blows to her head. 17. And there was a deep slash to her throat, but there was also some other slashes on her body. No identity. Yet again, another case with no identity. I think that's why I was drawn to this one, because they had a similarity to Tuesday's case. It was an oldie, and also they didn't know who this person was. They found some keys in her pocket, but that was it. There was no wallet, purse, no identifying information. However, in this case, it wasn't long before people came forward to say that somebody was missing. Two sisters that attended the Ohio State University. They went to the police station that morning and they reported their friend missing. She'd gone on a date the night before and she had not returned to their dorm room. They gave a description of their roommate and it did sound similar to the body that they had found that morning. That's really awful. Also, I don't believe that this woman, this body, was in a very pleasant way. Despite that, they were taken to the morgue and they were asked if they would be able to try and identify, and they did. They positively identified this body as their friend, Theora Hix. I really like that name. I've not heard that before, Theora, but I really like that. They were questioned and they said that Theora was a medical student and she was very concerned with her study. She was a really studious person and she had gone to the hospital earlier the day before to see if she could get some part-time work while she was studying. And they also found it strange that she was going on a date that night because she was not that way. She was very focused on her studies. However, they had noticed that she was sometimes seen in a little car with an older person, somebody that they thought was a faculty member, man. They also had seen her with a student, a male student. So they just assumed that she was on a date with the male student, but they also did know that she would sometimes be spending time with this faculty member, assuming that that was study related because she was very studious. They also said that it was very hard. They didn't know much about Theora because she was a very private person. She kept herself to herself. She wasn't immersing herself into life and making friends. She was a bit of a loner. They didn't have much to say about her. All they knew was that her family were from Florida. She had told them that. The police went to the hospital to verify the sister's story about where Mrs. Hix had been the day before. I'm going to call her Theora because I like the name. And the hospital had hired her there and then, and they were like training her up on the phone lines and things like that. They obviously desperately needed somebody. And then after a short while, she had to go. She said, I've got to go now because I've got a date. And when they asked who the date was, she wouldn't say. So this whole date thing was a bit of a mystery, really. But news travels super fast around campus that she has been murdered, and people start to come forward. More people have seen her in a small car with a member of staff, faculty, I like that word too. And a name comes forward, Dr. James Snook, Professor James Snook. Snook. No, I'm thinking snake. Snookums! Lots of students saying they often saw her in his car or in his company. Not only was Professor Snook a professor at the university, he was also a bit of a local celeb. He had won a gold medal in the Olympics, the deuce, for pistol shooting. Pistol shooting. He had worked at the university for quite a long time. He was 50. He was a senior member of the faculty, and he taught veterinarian medicine. Now, when the police call the university to say, can we have a little chit-chat with Snooky Boy, the university say, oh, actually he's not here. He's actually at the shooting range where he spends most of his time. Now, he was an Olympian in the old pistol shooting. Never heard of that one before. So it only makes sense that he spends a lot of time, doing that hobby at the shooting range. When they go to have a chat with Professor Snook, first of all, what they notice is that his hand is bandaged up. He's got a bad hand. Professor Snook told the officers that his movements the night before, and that he'd worked late and then he'd gone somewhere and then he'd gone home for 9:30 and was with his wife. And he said, ask people and they'll tell you about my alibi. And then something strange happened, because the coroner called the detective and he said, we've just had a young gentleman at the coroner's office requesting to see the body of Theora Hix. And this young man sounded like the young man that was spending quite a lot of time with Theora, the other man that she'd been seen with, a student. And this was a bit odd and a bit bizarre, and he was quite upset and he desperately wanted to see her body. He was called Marion Myers. So officers were sent to go and find Mr. Myers and check him out, because that was unusual behaviour. And we do know, don't we, that killers often sometimes insert themselves into investigations and things like that. That's a bit on the nose, isn't it? Oh, can I see her body? Anyhow, so the detective carries on and he goes to find the people that Professor Snook works with to just verify his alibi for the night before. But they could not, because nobody had worked as late as Professor Snook said he had worked. There was no proof that he was there. When he spoke to the employees, Professor Snoops, they did mention that the following morning, when he had come into work, the first thing that he had asked his people to do at the university, was to go and clean his car. And that in itself wasn't unusual. He would sometimes have people clean his car for him, but it was the fact that it was the very first thing he did. He came in and he wanted his car cleaned. And that was unusual. So the detectives got warrants for the car and the vehicle of Professor Snook and Mr. Myers. Both cars were looked at very carefully, and it was really annoying because Professor Snook's car was really clean, so it had been cleaned thoroughly inside and out, and that was quite annoying. But they did find a drop of what looked like blood on the passenger side. That was swabbed and sent off. Obviously we're talking 1929, so I mean it amazes me that even that existed. So that swab was sent away for testing, but it would take quite a long time, a few days. It wasn't an immediate thing, it wasn't quick, it was very old technology, and they could only determine whether it was what blood group it was. So it wouldn't be like it is now. It would just determine whether it was the same blood type as Theora. Completely the opposite with Mr. Myers' car. It had not been recently cleaned, and there was no trace of anything remotely, it hadn't been cleaned for a while. So you would think if there was any evidence it would be there, but there was no evidence. When they looked in the trunks of both of the vehicles, they found that in the professor's trunk there was a hammer, like the one that was used in the murder, and also a pair of stained gloves. So these were bagged and they were taken in for evidence as well. And this was enough to get a warrant for the professor's house. At this point, they had both men in custody, and they could only hold them for 48 hours. So they had Myers, they had the professor, and they were working quickly. So they searched the cars, and now they've got a warrant for Professor Snook's home. Can you imagine his wife? Oh my lord. This is where it gets spicy. They decided to have a little pokey around, and they had a warrant for clothing that looked like it had blood stains on it and things like that. They found some dry cleaning, a jacket that had been sent to the dry cleaners the day of the murder, and it had been returned and picked up, but it had blood stains on the sleeves, right? So they obviously didn't do a very good job. I think blood's quite difficult to get out of clothing anyhow. And then they looked into the home's furnace, and they found a stained shirt and a woman's vanity case. Now, I'm assuming that's one of the, like this. I'm assuming, don't know. Mr. Myers was released. They didn't have much on him. His not alibi, he didn't have an alibi particularly, but he had a story to tell, and that was that his friend had called him long distance to let him know about the death of his friend. They had been together, I think, or seeing each other 2 years previously, and he was close with Theora. So when he heard of her death, he was sad, and he travelled back, and he couldn't believe it. So that's why he had gone to the morgue, the coroner's office, to ask to see her, because he was in disbelief. And the police tracked down the friend that had called him, and the friend corroborated the story and said, yes, I did ring him. Yes, he was very upset, and he was long distance, he wasn't here. I had to call him, and he travelled here after he'd learned of her death. So I guess that's an alibi. The police now have one suspect in custody, Professor Snook, and they don't let him rest, they don't let him sleep. They just keep slowly unfolding all of the evidence they have against him. The jacket with the blood, the furnace, the shirt and the vanity case, all of this information, they keep drip feeding it to him so that he's like, oh my God, they know so much, and alluding to knowing more and all this, like a tactic to just make him feel uneasy. And what was the other evidence? The blood drop in the car. Also, her hand, Theora's hand, had an injury that looked like her hand had been shut in a car door. So it would seem like she might have tried to get out of the car, and then Professor Snook had pulled the car door shut on her hand, and that's why the blood drop was found where the blood drop was found, on the passenger side. It's all coming together, but not much really, nothing definitively tying him to it. His wife has given him an alibi for 9:30 that night to say that he was with her and that he didn't leave. And then, because this story has gathered momentum, everyone's talking about it, it's all over campus, it's all over the town, somebody comes forward, and this is a key witness. A bellman at the local YMCA, he came forward to say that Theora Hix rented an apartment at the YMCA and that she had a regular gentleman caller, and that caller was Professor Snook. They were often together at that apartment, so much so that the bellman believed that they were a married couple. So, I mean, what's his wife thinking? Where does she think he is? They went to the YMCA, they spoke to the manager. The manager said, yes, she lived here, Theora, but she didn't pay the rent. Professor Snook paid the rent. So he basically has set up a little love nest with his student, Theora. She's 25, he's 50, and he's married. Come along now. So, I mean, what? Naughty. And not only that, but on the morning that she was murdered, Professor Snook went to the YMCA and handed back the keys and said, don't worry, I won't be renting the apartment anymore. Cold? You've just murdered her, and you're like, the first thing you think of is, oh, actually, yeah, I'll save myself the money. Whoa. When presented with this information, he broke. Professor Snook knew that he was collared, and he confessed in a roundabout way at first. He confessed to taking keys from her body, and handing those back to the manager at the YMCA. So as soon as that happened, the interview was cut short, ended, and then they got a stenographer, somebody that would write down like minutes, because that's how they recorded interviews. And it's interesting because we have those interview notes here now, so I'm going to read some to you. Okie dokes. I find it fascinating. Here we go. So, what is your name? James Howard Snook. Your age? 49, sorry, not 50. Where do you live? And then he says his address. And then he's asked to say what happens on the June the 13th. He says that he met her about 3 years ago. Relationship continued very intimate way ever since, as she was a very good companion. I've been living with my wife during this 3-year period and regarded my wife very highly and respect her very much as a wife, but she lacks some of the companionship afforded by Mrs. Hix. Oh, I wonder what. By the way, his wife was a lot younger than him as well. Just saying. During the 3 years I knew Miss Hix, I did assist her in many ways towards education, but I found out it wasn't appreciated as much as I thought it should be. You don't give to receive, love. He goes on to say that Theora became very possessive of him and he didn't like it. He goes on to say that evening they're in the car together and they have a quarrel. And it goes like this. During this quarrel, she grabbed for the purse in which she sometimes carried a .41 caliber gun. In the struggle, she was hit on the head with a hammer with the intent to stun her. The heck, man. Okay. She continued desperately, and an increased number of blows of increasing force was necessary to stop her. 17? I think not. Realising then that her skull was fractured, and to relieve her suffering, I severed her jugular vein with my pocket knife. Oh, what a kind soul you are. I then proceeded to pick up the things that had been scattered during the struggle and left. The instrument when I used to quiet her was a hammer lying on the back of the seat. After leaving the rifle range, I proceeded home, tossing the purse from the quarry bridge into the river on my way. After the struggle was over, I discovered the gun was not in the purse. He said that in their argument, if he hadn't left his wife, that Theora was saying she was going to shoot his wife and his 2-year-old child and him. And that's why they had this row, and that's why he used such force, because he thought she was going to kill him and then his family. Righty-ho. When she started to get out of the car, I grabbed a hammer from the ledge of the back seat and hit her with the flat side of it. She got out and I followed, hitting her again and again. Damn you, I'll kill you, were her last words. I kept hitting her. I struck her once with the round end of the hammer. That was a hard one. She was unconscious then and suffering. What? So then you carry... She had my sympathy. I didn't want to hit her anymore. I hated to do that. She was lying on her back and moaning slightly when I took out my pocket knife and cut her jugular vein. Her handbag and keys came out of the car in the struggle. The wound she had on her abdomen and her back was machine cuts. She got them when she fell against the car. Okay. He then describes returning home in a daze. He sits in the dark and thinks of his actions, and then his wife comes down to check on him. She didn't see the blood all over him because it was too dark. Lies! He changed and went to bed but didn't sleep. The next day he pretended it didn't happen. He didn't know that the body had been found until he saw the news. On the 22nd of June, he was indicted and charged with first-degree murder. Now, the sentence for that will be death. So it's going to all go to court. He was charged with first-degree murder because what they could have argued is that the hammer blows, if he felt threatened by a gun and he thought, oh, she's going to shoot me, the hammer blows could be explained. But the fact that he then put her out of her misery, that's murder. So he got first degree. He was charged with first degree. He said that he lost his mind and he was in a, like nowadays you would call it, diminished responsibility. He said he snapped and he lost his mind. So they got some experts in to give him a little looking over. They found him to be sane. The trial began on the 3rd of August 1929 and there had been a number of delays. Lots of, his defence being like, oh, shall we do this? Shall we do that? And it just delayed the whole process. Professor James Snook was found guilty. Too much evidence against him. And I think the fact that he'd hit her and then slit her throat really played into the fact that he really wanted her dead. It wasn't just a case of protecting himself. There were a number of appeals to try and save his life, to, get a stay of execution. And I think it delayed the process a bit and his execution date, but ultimately it failed. And he then confessed fully. I wonder if there's a little bit of narcissism again in this case, because when he confessed, he said that she was threatening to expose him, and he knew that he had to get rid of her. He knew he had to kill her. So he holds his hands up and is like, I planned to kill her. That was the plan. And he was surprised that anyone tied him to the murder. He was incredibly shocked. Mate, you left her body at the shooting range, right? Where you spend all your time? Good one. His execution was the 1st of March 1930, and he was put in the electric chair. He was buried at his family's plot, but they didn't put his last name on the tombstone, so they didn't put it on. I think that was so that nobody would damage or desecrate the grave. I can't believe he thought no one would tie him to it. You're spending all your time with her. People are definitely going to say, oh, she's often with him. You rented an apartment, basically lived there with her. People always saw you coming and going. I can't see how, that blows my mind. Anyhow, that is all I have for you on today's case. I am going to re-dye my hair because it's getting a bit flat. I remember this happening with red. It kind of dulls out quite quickly. So next week I should be more vibrant yet again. Same red, but it will just be like pop. Also, where I was bleached at the ends of my hair have gone pink. It's exciting, isn't it? I'm going to love you and leave you because I desperately need to get myself a hot drink. I'm really chilly. Even though I'm in a t-shirt, I've just got cold, which is unusual because I'm being lit up by the freaking sun, and normally that makes me sweat, but not today. Maybe I'm ill. Shush. Right, have a wonderful weekend. I will see you all next week. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Sin and Tonic. I hope you join me next week with another true crime story in a glass or a vase or a jug of gin. Be good. Love you.